The mahogany conference table felt cold beneath my palms as I watched Uncle Richard's face drain of color. The lawyer's voice cut through the silence like a blade. To my beloved granddaughter Claire, who alone understood my true values. Richard's mouth hung open, his expensive tie suddenly looking like a noose. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The papers in my hands were worth more than his validation ever could be. But as I looked around that room full of relatives who'd written me off, I realized this wasn't about money at all. It was about finally knowing who I really was. Hi, I'm Claire. And 3 weeks ago, I thought I knew exactly where I stood in my family, dead last. The first thing you notice about St. Mary's Cathedral isn't the stained glass or the vaulted ceilings. It's how your own breathing sounds too loud when everyone's pretending to grieve someone they barely visited. I sat in the third row, close enough to look respectful, far enough back to avoid Uncle Richard's disapproving glares. My grandmother's casket was covered in white lilies, her favorite, though I seemed to be the only one who remembered that detail. Everyone else had gone with roses. Claire. I turned to find my cousin Jessica sliding into the pew beside me, her black Chanel dress probably costing more than my rent. We'd grown up together, but somewhere along the way, family dinners became competitions I never knew I was losing. "I'm surprised you came," she whispered, not unkindly, but with that careful tone people use when they're trying not to sound cruel. "I know you and Grandma Rose weren't exactly close." Weren't close. The words hit like a slap. I'd spent every Saturday for the past 2 years driving 3 hours to her nursing home, reading her mystery novels when her eyes got too weak, listening to stories about her childhood in Ireland that she'd tell and retell. But Jessica only saw the family gatherings I'd stopped attending, the holidays where I chose work over sitting at tables where every conversation felt like a judgment. "She was my grandmother too," I said quietly. The service blurred together, Father Mackenzie's generic words about eternal rest, my aunt sobbing dramatically in the front row despite visiting maybe twice a year, Uncle Richard standing tall and important as if grief was another business transaction he could manage. But it was afterward, at the reception in the church basement, where everything fell apart. I was standing by the coffee station, stirring cream into my cup, when I heard Uncle Richard's voice behind me. "Well, at least she showed up this time." I turned. He was talking to my father, but his eyes were on me, cold, calculating eyes that had never shown me anything but disappointment. "Richard, not here," Dad said quietly, but there was no real conviction in his voice. There never was when it came to standing up for me. "When, then?" Uncle Richard stepped closer, his voice dropping but not quite to a whisper. "At Christmas when she'll have another excuse? At Easter when she'll be too busy with whatever job she's pretending matters this week?" The room felt smaller suddenly. A few people had started to notice, conversations dying down as they sensed drama. "I work in nonprofit marketing," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I help organizations raise money for cancer research." Uncle Richard laughed, actually laughed. I'd told him I sold lemonade for a living. Cancer research. How noble. His tone could have frozen fire. "You know what your grandmother used to say about you, Claire? She said you were always the disappointment. Too stubborn to succeed, too proud to ask for help. Even now, standing here in that discount store dress, you still think you're better than the rest of us." The coffee cup slipped from my hands. I watched it fall in slow motion, the white ceramic shattering against the linoleum floor, dark liquid spreading like ink across the pale tiles. The entire room had gone silent now. 37 relatives and family friends, all staring at me, waiting to see how the disappointment would react to being called out at her own grandmother's funeral. I knelt down and started picking up the pieces, my hands shaking slightly. A few people moved closer to help, but Uncle Richard's voice stopped them. "Leave it," he said. "She's always been good at cleaning up her own messes." I stood up slowly, ceramic shards cupped in my palm. When I looked at Uncle Richard, I felt something cold and clear settle in my chest. "You're right," I said. "I am good at cleaning up messes. And I'm also good at remembering who made them." I walked to the trash can, dropped the pieces in, and headed for the door. Behind me, conversations resumed in hushed, excited tones. I could hear Jessica calling my name, but I didn't turn around. The parking lot was empty except for my beat-up Honda Civic, parked between Uncle Richard's Mercedes and my aunt's Lexus. I sat in my car for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to decide between crying and screaming. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Ms. Brennan, this is Harold Fitzgerald, your grandmother's attorney. Could you please call me at your earliest convenience? We need to discuss the will. I stared at the message, confused. Grandma Rose had always been careful with money, but I couldn't imagine she had much to leave behind. And why would her lawyer contact me directly? I was about to call when I saw Uncle Richard walking toward his car, still wearing that satisfied expression from inside. He caught my eye through my windshield and shook his head slowly, like I was a problem that had finally solved itself. I rolled down my window. Uncle Richard? He stopped, eyebrows raised with mild interest. Just so you know, I called out, my voice carrying across the empty parking lot. Grandma Rose visited me at my office 6 months ago. She spent 3 hours asking about my work, taking notes, telling me how proud she was. His expression faltered slightly. But you probably already knew that, I continued, starting my engine. Since you two were so close. I drove away before he could respond, but I caught his face in my rearview mirror, confusion mixed with something that looked almost like fear. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in my apartment, still in my funeral dress, dialing Harold Fitzgerald's number. The phone rang twice before a warm, gravelly voice answered. Ms. Brennan? Thank you for calling so quickly. I'm afraid we have quite a bit to discuss. Harold Fitzgerald's office looked exactly like what you'd expect from a 70-year-old estate attorney. Walls lined with leather-bound books, a heavy wooden desk that had probably witnessed decades of family drama, and the faint smell of pipe tobacco hanging in the air. Please, sit down, Ms. Brennan. He gestured to a burgundy leather chair across from his desk. Everything about him was gentle, his voice, his movements, even the way he arranged papers seemed careful and considerate. I perched on the edge of the chair, still not entirely sure why I was there. Mr. Fitzgerald, I have to be honest. I'm a little confused about why you called me directly. My Uncle Richard is the executor of my grandmother's estate, isn't he? Harold's weathered face creased into what might have been a smile. Actually, no. Your grandmother changed her will quite recently. About 6 months ago, in fact. 6 months ago. Right around the time she'd visited my office. She made you the primary beneficiary, Ms. Brennan. And she also named you as executor. I felt like someone had just told me the sky was green. I'm sorry, what? Your grandmother left you everything. The house, the investments, her savings account, even her car. He slid a thick folder across the desk. It's quite substantial, actually. Rose was much more financially savvy than most people realized. I opened the folder with trembling hands. Numbers swam in front of my eyes, bank statements, investment portfolios, property deeds. The house in Millbrook was worth almost $500,000. Her stock portfolio was worth even more. This can't be right, I whispered. She lived in a nursing home. She wore the same 3 cardigans. She clipped coupons from newspapers. Harold leaned back in his chair. Your grandmother was raised during the Depression, Ms. Brennan. She never lost the habit of living below her means. But she was also incredibly intelligent about money. She'd been planning this for years. I flipped through pages of legal documents, my head spinning. But why me? Uncle Richard has been managing her affairs. Jessica just graduated law school. I work for a non-profit that can barely make payroll. That's exactly why, Harold said quietly. Rose came to see me 6 months ago, right after she visited you at work. She said watching you dedicate your life to helping others, even when it meant sacrificing your own comfort, reminded her of why she'd worked so hard to build wealth in the first place. My throat felt tight. She never said anything to me. She wanted it to be a surprise. But more than that, she wanted to make sure it couldn't be contested. She spent weeks making sure every document was ironclad. He pulled out another file. She also left detailed instructions about how she wanted the family informed. What kind of instructions? Harold's eyes actually twinkled. She wanted the will read at a family meeting. This Sunday, at 2 o'clock, in my conference room. She specifically requested that everyone be present, all the relatives who came to the funeral. Everyone? Everyone. And she wanted them to hear it from me, in her own words. She recorded a video message to be played before I read the will. I stared at him. A video message? 12 minutes of your grandmother explaining her decision in detail. She was quite thorough in her reasoning. The weight of what he was saying started to sink in. In 3 days, I'd be sitting in a room with Uncle Richard, Jessica, and the rest of my family while they learned that the disappointment, the one who worked a meaningless job and wore discount store dresses, had inherited everything. Mr. Fitzgerald, I need to ask you something. Was my grandmother, was she angry with them? He considered this carefully. I don't think Rose was angry, exactly. But I do think she was disappointed. She mentioned that she'd tried for years to connect with her other grandchildren and children, but they only seemed interested in her when it came to discussing her plans for the future. He made air quotes. Her words, not mine. And me? You never asked about inheritance, not once. In fact, she told me that when she mentioned wanting to update her will, you tried to change the subject. He smiled. She found that very telling. I thought about all those Saturday visits, how I dreaded the moment she'd start talking about death and wills and who would get what. I'd assumed she was fishing for reassurance that someone would take care of her things, and it had made me uncomfortable. I'd never wanted her to think I was there for any reason other than just being there. There's one more thing, Harold said, reaching into his desk drawer. She left you this. He handed me a small, wrapped box. My name was written on it in my grandmother's careful handwriting. Inside was her wedding ring, a simple gold band that she'd worn for 63 years, and a folded piece of paper. Claire, the note began in her shaky script. You are the only one who never asked me what I was worth. Instead, you asked me about my dreams, my fears, my stories. You listened when I talked about your grandfather. You remembered that I preferred lilies to roses. You never once looked at me like I was a problem to be managed or an asset to be inherited. You looked at me like I was your grandmother. That's why you're reading this note instead of someone else. The money isn't really the gift, sweetheart. The gift is knowing that at least one person in this family understood what really mattered. I love you. Make sure they know that your worth was never in question, theirs was. Grandma Rose. I read the note twice before the words blurred together. Harold silently handed me a tissue. She loved you very much, he said gently. I know. I wiped my eyes, careful not to smudge the ink on her note. Mr. Fitzgerald, what happens on Sunday? What actually happens? We gather everyone in my conference room. I play Rose's video message. Then I read the will aloud, as she requested. It's all very formal and legal. And Uncle Richard? Harold's expression grew more serious. Your uncle has been calling my office every day since the funeral, demanding details about the estate. He seems to believe he has a right to immediate information. He thinks he's inheriting everything. Yes, I believe he does. As does Jessica. They've both mentioned plans for the house, discussions about liquidating assets. Harold gathered the papers back into neat stacks. Rose anticipated this. She was very specific about wanting them to hear the truth directly from her. I stood up, still clutching the ring box. Sunday at 2 o'clock, he confirmed. Claire? Your grandmother was a remarkable woman. She knew exactly what she was doing. Walking to my car, I felt like I was moving through a dream. 3 days ago, I'd been the family disappointment, cleaning up coffee cups and leaving funerals early. Now I was, what? An heiress? The thought felt absurd. My phone rang as I was pulling out of the parking lot. Uncle Richard's name flashed on the screen. I almost didn't answer. Then I thought about Grandma Rose, sitting in Harold Fitzgerald's office 6 months ago, carefully planning this moment. Hello, Uncle Richard. Claire. His voice was different now, warmer, more interested. I wanted to apologize for earlier. The funeral was emotional for all of us. I understand. Listen, I've been thinking, maybe we should get together this week, talk about Grandma Rose, share some memories. I realize we haven't been as close as we should have been. I pulled into a coffee shop parking lot and sat there, phone pressed to my ear, listening to my uncle try to rebuild a bridge he'd spent years burning down. That sounds nice, I said carefully. Great. How about Friday evening? We could have dinner, and maybe we could discuss some practical matters too. Help you understand what happens next with the estate and all that. There it was. What happens next with the estate? Actually, Uncle Richard, I think we should wait until Sunday. Sunday? Harold Fitzgerald wants to meet with the whole family on Sunday. Something about the will. Silence stretched between us. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its artificial warmth. What do you mean, the whole family? I think he just wants to make sure everyone understands the legal process. I kept my voice neutral, almost bored. You know how lawyers are with their procedures. Yes, he said slowly. I suppose they are. After we hung up, I sat in my car for a long time, watching people come and go from the coffee shop, everyone going about their normal Thursday afternoon while my entire world had just shifted on its axis. Sunday was 3 days away. Sunday afternoon felt like walking into a courtroom where I was both the defendant and the surprise witness. Harold Fitzgerald's conference room could have seated 20 people, but we were only 8, Uncle Richard and Aunt Patricia, Jessica and her brother Michael, my parents, my cousin David, and me. Everyone had dressed up, the way people do when they think money might be involved. Uncle Richard sat at the head of the table like he was chairing a board meeting, his expensive suit impeccable, his silver hair perfectly styled. He'd been making small talk about golf and market investments, the kind of casual conversation that was really about establishing dominance. Well, he said, checking his Rolex, I suppose we should get started. Harold, I appreciate you organizing this, though I'm not sure it was entirely necessary to bring everyone together just to handle some paperwork. Harold smiled politely from behind his laptop. Actually, Richard, this was Rose's specific request. She wanted everyone here for the reading of her will. Jessica leaned forward. Grandma Rose made a video? That's so sweet. She probably wanted to say goodbye to all of us. In a manner of speaking, Harold said. He pressed a key on his laptop, and suddenly my grandmother's face filled the large screen at the end of the room. She was sitting in what looked like Harold's office, wearing her best blue cardigan, the one with the pearl buttons that she saved for special occasions. Her white hair was carefully styled, and her eyes held a sharpness I remembered from my childhood. Hello, my dear family, her recorded voice said, and the room fell completely silent. If you're watching this, then I'm gone, and Harold is about to read my will. But before he does, I want to explain some things. Uncle Richard shifted uncomfortably. This clearly wasn't what he'd expected. I've lived 92 years, Grandma Rose continued, and I've learned that people show you who they really are when they think no one important is watching. For the past 10 years, since your grandfather died, I've been watching all of you very carefully. On screen, she folded her hands in her lap, the same gesture she'd made 1,000 times during our Saturday visits. Some of you visited me regularly, but only to discuss my health, my finances, my future plans. You spoke to me like I was a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved. You assumed that because I lived simply, I had nothing of value. You were wrong about both things. I could feel the tension in the room rising. Jessica's face had gone pale. Uncle Richard was staring at the screen like it might catch fire. But one of you, Grandma Rose said, and her expression softened, one of you came to see me every week for 2 years, not because you wanted something, but because you wanted to know me. One of you listened to my stories, brought me books, remembered that I preferred tea to coffee and lilies to roses. One of you worked at a job that paid nothing but helped people, and never once complained about the sacrifices that choice required. She paused, and I realized everyone in the room was looking at me. Claire, she said, speaking directly to the camera now, you never asked me what I was worth. You asked me what I remembered about your grandfather's laugh. You asked me about my childhood in Ireland. You asked me if I was happy. Those questions told me everything I needed to know about your character. Uncle Richard's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles working. To my other children and grandchildren, my grandmother continued, I want you to understand something. I am not punishing you for neglecting me. I am rewarding someone for seeing me. There is a difference. The video ended, and Harold cleared his throat. Now, if I may proceed with the reading of the will. What followed was 15 minutes of legal language that essentially boiled down to this: Claire Brennan inherits everything. The house, the investments, the savings accounts, the car, even my grandmother's collection of mystery novels. Everything. Uncle Richard sat frozen throughout the entire reading. Jessica kept looking between the legal documents and me like she was trying to solve a puzzle. My parents seemed stunned. When Harold finished, the silence stretched until it became unbearable. This is ridiculous, Uncle Richard finally said, his voice tight with controlled fury. Mother was clearly not in her right mind. Claire, you obviously manipulated an elderly woman, Richard. Harold's voice cut through the accusation like ice. I met with your mother regularly for 6 months while she planned this. She was mentally sharp until the day she died. She specifically anticipated this reaction, which is why she insisted on the video recording and why she had her competency evaluated by 2 independent physicians. Their reports are part of the legal file. Uncle Richard turned to me, his face flushed. You knew about this. You've been planning this. I looked at him across the mahogany table, this man who had spent 30 years making me feel small, who had humiliated me at my own grandmother's funeral, who had never once asked me about my dreams or my fears or what mattered to me. No, I said quietly. I didn't know anything about this until Thursday. But you know what I did know? I knew that Grandma Rose's favorite memory was dancing with Grandpa in their kitchen on Sunday mornings. I knew she was afraid of dying alone. I knew she regretted not traveling more when she was young. I stood up slowly. What did you know about her, Uncle Richard? Besides how much money she had? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Jessica was crying now, quiet tears that she kept wiping away with the back of her hand. Claire, I'm sorry. I should have visited more. It's not about the visits, I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. It's about the kind of person you are when you think no one important is watching. I gathered my copies of the legal documents and stood to leave. At the door, I turned back. Uncle Richard? At the funeral, you said Grandma Rose thought I was always the disappointment. I felt my grandmother's ring on my finger, solid and warm. You were wrong about that too. Walking to my car, I felt something I'd never experienced before, not triumph, exactly, but a deep, quiet certainty about who I was and what I was worth. The money would change things, of course. I could quit my job or keep it, travel or stay home, buy a house or donate everything to charity. But the real inheritance wasn't the bank accounts or the property. It was the knowledge that someone had seen me clearly, had recognized my worth when I couldn't see it myself, and had loved me not for what I could provide, but for who I had chosen to be. I thought about my grandmother, planning this moment for months, knowing exactly how it would unfold. She'd given me more than financial security. She'd given me the gift of understanding that kindness and character had been noticed, valued, and rewarded. As I drove home, I realized I wasn't the family disappointment anymore. I wasn't sure what I was, exactly, but I knew what I wasn't. And for the first time in my 30 years, that felt like enough.